just so everybody knows. So we'll be providing information on the draft climate change and carbon plan. So we'll have opening remarks from Board of Forestry Chair Jim Kelly, as I mentioned. If you do have clarifying questions on the process or the public engagement period, please put them into the chat function. If you have comments on the content or the development of the plan, we would really appreciate getting those in writing, and there's a link to a comment form on our website. And the URL for that website is shown there on the screen. At the end of our presentation today, so about 1 o'clock, we'll have a period for questions on the process and the engagement period. And we will be accepting public comment on this draft through the end of June. So please go and provide us written comment, and we will incorporate it into the plan. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Jim Kelly, Chair of the Board of Forestry, to say a few comments to start off.
Great, thank you, Danny. Welcome, and thank you for showing your interest in the development of the Oregon Department of Forestry's Climate Change and Carbon Plan. As board chair, I want to emphasize the importance of this plan in setting the agency and the board on a path to better inform and guide contributions of forests to greenhouse gas sequestration and emissions reductions for the state of Oregon. The board anticipates using this plan as a policy framework with goals directing near and long-term agency actions. This plan will also serve to inform the board in updating the Forestry Program for Oregon, which serves as the guiding policy for the Department of Forestry. You'll hear from the agency in a moment, where they will provide background on what has led us to this effort, an overview of what is in the draft plan, and a working definition of climate smart forestry to guide the effort. In the course of plan development and engagement over the coming months, the board will stay connected in a listening role and look to do further deliberations this fall before final approval at the end of the year. We hope you will stay engaged with us along the way and provide your thoughts on the plan and complementing goals and actions, and how to best serve Oregonians in contributing to the governor's efforts to reduce greenhouse gases. On a personal note, I just want to mention there's really, climate change was what really brought me to the Board of Forestry and wanting to do this work. I think in meeting after meeting in the first year and a half, I would bring up this issue of climate change, and it felt like we were not moving much as a board or a department. So it's thrilling to me to see us move into this stage. So thank you again for your time and participation.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. At this time, we'll move along into our presentation. Again, if you do have clarifying questions about the process or the engagement period, please enter those into the chat and we will get to those at the end. So first off, we're going to start with how we got to where we are today. And here we have a brief history of what ODF has been engaged with since really 1990 in relation to climate change and global warming. In 1990, the Oregon Task Force on Global Warming report came out, which did have ODF employees participate in that. The Climate Trust was funded in 1997. The Forest Resource Trust, which does provide some funding mechanisms for ecosystem services, was established in 1999. As we move into the 2000s, House Bill 2200 was passed, which provided the department with statutory authority to develop a carbon offset program, as well as incorporating carbon sequestration as an ecosystem service in the Forest Resource Trust. In 2003, there was a large update to the Forestry Program for Oregon, which is the board's guiding document for policy, and that started to incorporate climate change into the policy document for the board. The Biomass Working Group was in 2005, followed by the establishment of the Global Warming Commission in 2007. the Department of Forestry did host a meeting at the request of the Global Warming Commission in 2008. As you see, we increased the number of things that we have been doing over the decades. In 2010, the first climate adaptation framework was initiated. And we have actually just completed the update to that this January, I believe, is when that came out, including participation from 24 different state agencies. In 2011, the Forestry Program for Oregon was updated again and was included stronger language around climate change in that. 2013, the Board of Forestry approved the climate change section of the work plans. And if you're not familiar with the Board of Forestry's annual or biennial process for setting policy for the department, the work plans are part of that. In 2015, we did adopt the board adopted the climate change recommendations to the Forestry Plan for Oregon. And in 2019, the department completed the ecosystem carbon report, which was the first in a series of reports that the department has been working on related to carbon sequestration in the forest and in harvested wood products. So in 2020, the department provided feedback or a report to the governor's office in response to Executive Order 2004. And that really began this process, which was kind of stemmed out of that. So legislatively, in 1997, HB 3283 kind of started the global warming and climate change legislation within the state legislature. And it regulated carbon dioxide emissions, and it paved the way for the Climate Trust, a 501c3, apologies. Again, in 2001, HB 2200 established the carbon offset statutes in forestry, and it included carbon sequestration as an environmental service. In 2007, HB 3543 established the Global Warming Commission and the Oregon Climate Change. Hopefully my computer decides to stay going. Climate Change Research Institute. So recent legislation, in 2019, we saw House Bill 2020, which provided a cap and invest mechanism across state government to reduce Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions and utilized natural climate solutions as an alternative compliance mechanism to do so. That one did not make it out of that session. In 2020, House Bill 1530 was much like the previous session's House Bill 2020, and it laid out the program to reduce emissions and increase sequestration. It also did not make it out of the legislative session that year. So in March of 2020, Governor Brown signed Executive Order 2004. Executive Order 2004 asked and tasked ODF to put climate change and its impacts front and center, along with many other agencies. We provided a report to the governor's office in May and included the current and anticipated actions that the department could do within its statutory authorities. So following that report submission, the governor's office requested that the Department of Forestry draft a climate change plan. And that plan was meant to embrace and center climate smart forestry as kind of the leading policy for forestry in Oregon, and to really make Oregon forestry and the Oregon forest sector a leader in the region related to addressing climate change through climate smart forestry. So other things that have been occurring with the shift in the administration at the federal level, there has been a series of renewed efforts nationally, including President Biden signing Executive Order 14008, which is tackling the climate change crisis at home and abroad. And that was signed January 27th of this year. Within that, it really emphasizes the role of agriculture and forestry in climate mitigation, specifically to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's work. And they're working on incorporating climate smart agriculture and climate smart forestry into their work at different levels. It also establishes the goal of the 30 by 30 goal, which is protecting and conserving 30% of the nation's natural working lands as natural working lands by 2030. So the current policy at ODF really lies within the Forestry Program for Oregon. And it's not a statute or a rule. It is a document and a process that provides a coherent foundation for establishing the board's priorities, policy deliberation, and guidance as it through its initiatives and its planning processes. So it guides policy by providing a clear, quantifiable picture of sustainable forest management in all the states' public and private forests should look like. It also provides a basis for future policy work. So we'll come back to this sustainable forest management in a little bit. It guides planning by highlighting the connections between the goals and objectives within the board and the department and the policies of other natural resource agencies. The Forestry Program for Oregon dates back to 1977, and it has been updated many times since then. It lays out the mission, the values, the vision, the goals, the objectives, and indicators for the policy of the board. Starting in about 2003, the Montreal process for sustainable forest management was the guiding framework for the Forestry Program for Oregon. So for the mission, it does establish the purpose of the board. It identifies the guiding philosophies and values of the board. It describes the conditions the board wants to establish over about a 20-year horizon. It has a multitude of goals that identify what the board wants to achieve over the next 8 years and the objectives that can achieve those in the near term. And then indicators that we can use to measure whether or not we're being successful in the progress of achieving those goals. One last thing on the Forestry Program for Oregon, it is meant to be updated periodically, and ideally that would be on an 8-year time frame. As you see, the last one was updated in 2011, so we are due for a revision of that in the near future. We'll talk about that towards the end of this presentation. So how we got here, March 2020, this is just a recap. March 2020, the governor signs Executive Order 2004. In May of 2020, the department submits the report outlined by the executive order to the governor's office. In late July, stemming from that initial report submission, the governor's office provided additional guidance to the department to create a climate change plan. Since that time, the department has been using its staff to develop the climate change plan, the climate change and carbon plan. And today we are starting our public input and public engagement process and moving into the more review period of the draft development process. So the intent of the climate change and carbon plan as presented by the governor's office is that the department will position itself as a regional leader in climate smart forestry. The plan will build on the highlighted work that the department identified in the May 2020 report on the executive order. It puts in place expectations and accountability for the board and the department in implementing climate smart forestry and addressing climate change across all all of the divisions within the department. The purpose, vision, and principles of the climate change and carbon plan are as follows. The purpose is to make Oregon forestry a leader in climate change mitigation and adaptation. And for that, the department will be a leader in promoting climate smart forest practices and actions that achieve our vision by operationalizing goals, implementing actions, and measuring progress to achieve climate goals. The vision, the Oregon Board and Department of Forestry provide national leadership in climate smart and socially equitable forest policies that ensure climate health, resilient forests, and a viable forest product industry and vibrant rural communities. We have 4 primary guiding principles for this. The first is that climate change is a serious threat. We have less than a decade to alter behaviors, and if we want to avoid catastrophic impacts, we must be innovative, creative, and proactive in working towards solutions, not simply react to the results of climate change. Second, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities have been and continue to be some of the most climate impacted communities. Forest policies will be shaped through a lens of social justice and equity. Actions will prioritize benefits to historically and currently underserved communities as they adapt to a changing climate. Oregon's forest sector offers opportunities for significant sequestration and storage, both in the forest and in harvested wood products, as well as opportunities to promote clean water and air and preserving forest resilience in the form of flood control, biodiversity, and thermal refugia, among others. As changing climates affect forests, incorporation of the best available science and practices will be key to adaptive management and planning across ownership type, size, and management goals. So why do we need a plan? So climate change is threatening Oregon's forests and the forest products industry through increased severity and incidence of wildfires, droughts, and greater susceptibility to insects and disease. We see that today with most of the state being in drought, and our recent discovery of additional invasive species like sudden oak death in Southern Oregon, and widespread outbreaks of bark beetles on the east side of the state. Climate change is an existential problem that differently affects vulnerable populations, including people of color and lower income Oregonians. Without substantial behavior changes and mitigation efforts to limit global warming to less than 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit by 2030, the region and the world is very likely to experience high levels of ecosystem degradation and species extinctions. So while in Oregon, we may not see drastic decreases in precipitation, that timing will be different. It will be in more extreme events, and we are seeing the effects of increasing temperatures throughout the year. So what is climate smart forestry? So for the purpose of the climate change and carbon plan, climate smart forestry is anchored in sustainable forest management and evolved from climate smart agriculture ideas of the early 2010s. So I want to bring us back to sustainable forest management for a moment and remind everybody that sustainable forest management is in the Forestry Program for Oregon. It's where it's rooted and where the base of it lies. So climate smart forestry is part of that kind of suite of area around sustainable forest management. At its core, climate smart forestry has 3 main areas of adaptation, mitigation, and the social dimensions of communities and economies. At this time, we'll start talking about the various goals that we've put into the climate change and carbon plan. We have identified 8 primary goals for the plan, including climate-informed forestry, fire response and fire smoke adapted communities, state forest management, federal forest and all forest land restoration, urban and community forests, reforestation and afforestation, maintaining and conserving forests, and then research and monitoring, which really is going to be the linchpin to know if we're achieving any of the goals or all of the goals. For climate-informed forestry, the goal is to establish a just and equitable transition to climate-informed silviculture and climate-smart forestry that optimizes climate mitigation and adaptation while maintaining a sustainable flow of wood products to ensure long-term resource benefit and the viability of the forest products industry and flow of long-lived wood products into the harvested wood products pool. Fire management, response, and fire and smoke adapted communities will not only fall on the Department of Forestry, but its partner agencies like the Health Authority and the Department of Environmental Quality. So the goal is to modernize Oregon's complete and coordinated wildfire protection system to respond to the increased severity of wildfire. As our numbers have shown, we haven't been increasing the number of starts of fires, but the severity of the fires that do start has been increasing. We will promote fire and smoke adapted communities in the wild and urban interface to mitigate the impacts of climate-induced increases in wildfire severity. I think 2020 really did highlight some of the issues around our communities and the infrastructure that is there. On state forest managed lands, the goal is to lead by example and demonstrate climate smart forestry management on state forests to achieve greatest permanent value. This will not be done without whatever the best available science is at the time. And it will rely on active management to ensure that we are managing the forest in a climate smart manner. All lands forest restoration will accelerate the pace and scale and quality of forest restoration to increase the resilience to increased wildfire severity and incidence. It will support implementation of the recommendations of the Governor's Council on Wildfire Response, as well as incorporating the shared stewardship agreements and good neighbor authority agreements that the department has with the U.S. Forest Service. Urban and community forests. So most people in Oregon do live in urban and community forests. So the goal is to increase the extent and resilience of urban and community forests to maximize the climate mitigation and health benefits of urban forest canopies. Reforestation and afforestation are to facilitate and encourage the reforestation of areas burned by wildfire and afforest areas of low productivity lands that are understocked or not in forest use at this time. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, a UN group that has been studying climate change and putting out policy papers for some time, has identified reforestation and afforestation as one of the ways to combat climate change. And that's what the graphic on the right shows. The only issue there is that food security may come into conflict with it if afforestation starts to happen on agricultural lands that are being used for food production. Other than that, it does show positive benefits across the board. Maintaining and conserving forests. So while the department doesn't have direct jurisdiction over the land use laws in the state, we do work with our partner agencies to ensure that the land use laws are meeting the goal. And the goal for this plan is to support that strong but flexible land use planning system as a cornerstone of maintaining Oregon's forests on private lands. Since the inception of this land use planning system, more than almost 40 years ago, only about 3% of Oregon's forest lands have been lost to conversion, which is a very good number in my opinion. So research and monitoring is one of the things that's going to make it so that we understand if we're meeting the rest of the goals or not. Maintaining a research and monitoring program to track the status and trends of ecological, economic, and social indicators and the effects of climate change to track progress related to this plan is going to be key. At the right here, you see a chart from the Ecosystem Carbon Report, which we have developed in cooperation with the USDA Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. And this is showing the carbon stocks by ownership between 2000 and 2016. At this time, we'll move into the supporting actions. So I didn't really talk about the layout of the plan. And as you download it and look at it and provide feedback, you will notice that there are multiple sections. To start off with, you have the goals that we just talked about. Following that, we have supporting actions. Those actions are meant to support multiple goals. They aren't linked to one single goal. And the impacts will extend to several goals at the same time. There are co-benefits for the different actions for the different goals. So the supporting actions will be incorporated into agency planning, which includes documents and processes like the forest management plan, implementation plans, and annual operating plans, among others. So those all have different time frames, time periods that they look at, and scope that they encompass. So many of the other plans and processes will also have public engagement periods and are open for public comment as we work through those. So some of the supporting actions include things like incorporating climate change into the FPA rule development and revision process, incentivizing climate smart forestry, providing recognition of climate mitigation and adaptation measures, providing internal carbon pricing processes, restoration of low or underproductive producing forests, for example, Swiss needle casts on the Northern Oregon coast where the trees essentially are not growing at this time, increasing restoration efforts on prescribed fire program, afforestation and reforestation in municipal and community environments, investigating further decarbonization of forest activities and harvest and how we can reduce our emissions from those forest harvest activities, among various other supporting actions. So the next steps that we'll be taking are public engagement. Our website is going to be central to this engagement. The plan is currently on there. It can be downloaded and public comment can be made on that plan at this time. Updates will be posted as they are available. We hope to receive constructive information about what is missing in the plan. And we hope that the public comment form will be utilized extensively. Written public comments will be open until the end of June, as I mentioned at the beginning. We can always provide comments to the Board of Forestry at any of their meetings that are open to that. And this will be an iterative process. So we will have iterative updates, hopefully have feedback loops and information, including things like a frequently asked questions or common questions document, fact sheets, and feedback that we receive, all on that website and available for the public to view. We will be working through this process from now until about the end of the year. So we'll be incorporating the feedback that we receive in July from this public engagement process. So we will also be gathering public comment with the Board of Forestry, with tribes, with counties, among other groups. And a revised draft will be presented at a pre-decisional workshop, likely in September, between Board of Forestry members and the department's executive leadership. After that, we'll do final editing and hopefully provide the board with a draft to approve in November. So the follow-on planning processes that will occur to the climate change and carbon plan are initiation of a revision of the forestry program for Oregon. So as I mentioned earlier, it was last updated in 2011 and reflected the 2003 edition using the Montreal criteria for sustainable forestry. And there we see the sustainable forestry management impetus again. So it updated the mission, vision, and values. It did focus the shift from timber supply assessments to keeping forest lands and forest use. And it included 19 indicators of sustainable forest management to measure quantitative and qualitative attributes and monitor trends. Direction to the update of the FPO was on an 8-year cycle. We're at 10 at this time, so we'll be working to pursue that down the road. So the revision is a substantial process in terms of time and commitment. The assessments, the public engagement and input, and board discussion and time all take time. The process has served to harmonize the board and the department in policy and priority in the past, and the documents serve as a coherent voice regarding board forest policy and planning, and are used throughout agency planning and plan development processes. So we are envisioning that a revision of this will take place or could start in 2022, and it will follow the climate change and carbon plan. So we will begin with the consideration of if the Montreal criteria or an alternative framework is the best use at this time. The forest management plan is specific to Oregon State forests that we manage. And in October of 2020, the Board of Forestry gave direction to the State Forest Division to continue the development of a draft habitat conservation plan and a companion forest management plan. So that is covering about 640,000 acres of ODF managed lands west of the Cascades within the HCP administrative draft area. The HCP is entering the NEPA process with the federal government in March of 2021. The State Forest Division is beginning the development of the forest management plan and its associated implementation plans. For more information about that, you can utilize the website that's at the bottom there. So I went through that a bit quicker than I was expecting. For more, if you have questions or would like more resources, the link to the climate change page, the Board of Forestry page, Governor Brown's Climate Policy Office, and the Oregon Global Warming Commission are all listed on this page. So with that, I think we can start in on our question period and actually save some people some time today. So in the chat, I see that Joseph is asking about that, the Forestry Program for Oregon, and if the climate change and carbon plan will kind of lead that in time or principle. Both is how we see it. So we will finish the climate change and carbon plan, and then we will start working on the Forestry Program for Oregon. And as Chair Kelly mentioned at the beginning, the Forestry Program for Oregon will likely follow principles that are laid out in the climate change and carbon plan. So I'm happy to answer questions on the process, on public engagement and things like that. If you want to have, or if you have questions specific to what's in the plan or provide feedback on the plan, I really encourage you to utilize the written comment section on our website. And we would really like to see that. So Tony asks how the plan will impact urban forests that are managed by municipalities, and will there be new regulations or incentives? So for those that don't know, the department does have an urban and community forestry program. At this time, it's federally funded, and it's been around for about 30 years. It really provides technical assistance and grants in the past to municipalities as incentives for urban forestry. It manages our Tree City USA program, and it will largely, what the plan intends to do is largely follow along with how that's been operated in the past by providing technical assistance and incentives, but not regulations at this time. But we do see urban forestry and green infrastructure as a key part of the urban forestry side of things. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Make my chat window a little bigger here. So Jacqueline Abad, how critical is it to have a plan in place as our state continues to see drought conditions and warmer temps? I think that the policy direction that the department has had makes it pretty clear that it's very important for us to have a plan. This kind of fits in with the other planning processes that have been taking place, including the climate adaptation framework, which is a way for state agencies to kind of see, to use as a tool to guide state agencies as we work through climate change and adaptation. And that is actually housed at the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD, and is available there. So I hope that answered that question. If not, please follow up. For forest practitioners, what will the biggest changes from past practice in implementing this plan be, particularly around state lands? Will management regimes change? So on state lands, that's really going to be housed in the forest management plan, and incorporating this plan as a guiding principles document, as a guiding policy document into the forest management plan, and really centering climate smart forestry is how that's going to take place. And again, the principles there are that adaptation, mitigation, and then communities and economies are really key to addressing climate change across the board. So thank you for that, Amber. Greg asked, the percentage of OFS in the Tillamook Astoria, Forest Grove is 1 or 2%, and the LYR is roughly 10 to 12%. So that is a question that is more along the state forest implementation plan process. And we will be working with state forests on those in the future. So because this plan isn't in place now, it's not being used as a guiding document, but we are engaged with state forests on their planning processes. So Joseph asked, will the climate change and carbon plan include more realistic science-based measurements of greenhouse gas emissions that result from timber harvest or wood product production activities? So I want to highlight the work of Andrew Yost and our co-producers at the U.S. Forest Service. So we've done a series of monitoring projects, measurement projects, including the Forest Ecosystem Carbon Report, the Sawmill Energy Report, which looks at the energy used in the production side of things. And then the Harvested Wood Products Report is in the final drafting stages, and then will be released in the near future, which looks at the storage and sequestration in harvested wood products. And taking all of those together, we're going to have a good assessment of where the greenhouse gas storage and emissions are across the landscape. And then those will be updated in the future on varying timeframes. So Lauren asks, are you planning to reference coordinate with the Global Warming Commission, Natural Working Lands Report, or the two documents to be unrelated? So the Oregon Global Warming Commission was tasked in Executive Order 2004 with developing goals for natural working lands across Oregon. And as that process is moving along, we are linked together, and I'm actually working with the Global Warming Commission on those goals. So when they're completed, which will likely be ahead of this being completed, we will be integrating whatever comes out of the Global Warming Commission into this plan. So I don't see them being completely unlinked, but they will be two separate documents, not the same, but referencing and related to each other. So Dan asked about internal carbon pricing, and that's largely the idea that you can set a price internally, and when you can shift to carbon markets instead of doing your traditional markets at that price, that's when you would take a different management approach, one direction or another. And it's meant to, this plan is intended for us to consider that, what that would look like, what that would be on state forest lands. And it's becoming more and more utilized, especially within like Fortune 500 companies. And it's something that it may make sense in the natural resource lands as well. I'm not seeing any more questions. I would be happy to stay and answer more if anyone has any. I do want to remind people that this session was recorded, and also mention that we are going to be having it translated into Spanish, and both versions will be posted. The videos of both versions will be posted on the website for people to come back and reference at a later time. All right. So I'll stick around and I'll leave up the chat. And if anybody has more questions, feel free to ask them. And if anybody is wondering about the logo that you saw at the beginning, so it does embody the different parts of climate smart forestry, including adaptation, so a response to the climate impacts of climate change in Oregon forests. The social dimension, urban forestry, community forestry. Mitigation, so utilizing natural resources and natural climate solutions to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And then it's got some carbon dioxide in there too, because that's what we're targeting. So again, I'll stay on if anybody has questions. Reach out if you would like to. Please provide us written comments on our website. And Seth, do you have a question? You should be able
Okay, there we go. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
So my question, Danny, is with regards to the substitution, how are you, is there going to be a section in here looking at that? I'm just looking at the price of lumber right now, for example, and a lot of that is driven by availability. As we see that increase across the globe, and certainly in our local economies, things like alternative plastic flooring and things like that are becoming, more and more enticing to individuals. And so in so much as we're trying to incentivize renewable resources and the use of those, how are you addressing that, and will that be addressed in this report?
We aren't addressing that specifically in this. We are going to work to incorporate ideas of linkage and substitution and things like that. And some of that may be coming out of the research projects that we have ongoing. So I don't know if that completely answered your question. It's not dealt with specifically in this plan as we look to incentivize climate smart forestry across the landscape. I think that it will become more and more of a problem if prices stay where they are, but
I think it already is a problem. So I would encourage some thought around that.
Yep. No, definitely. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions come in, so I encourage you to use the written comments, and if anyone has anything, put it there, and we will continue our public engagement down the road. Thanks to everybody for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing what people have to say on the plan. With that, we're going to end the meeting. Thank you.